Hi, I'm William Malone. Now, some of you may know me as a writer and director of things like House on Haunted Hill or Fear.com, or some of the TV shows I've done like Tales from the Crypt and Masters of Horror. But today we're going to talk about something very different. We're going to talk about these guys. So I want to tell you a story, and it's a true story. It's something that happened to me, which is still difficult for me to believe, but it was absolutely true. It's a story my mom used to tell because my mom's involved in this, and my mom and dad in some fashion. And it really started in late 1963. I remember I was in my room, and my brother came into the room with a transistor radio, and it was blaring out, "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And then we went, "What the hell is that?" And he said it was a band from England called the Beatles. And we all went, "Beatles? Beatles? That's like Bugs, you know? What a weird name for a band." And my mom, who is actually part of this story, came in. She had a magazine that showed us vague pictures of the Beatles, and they looked really strange. So we were all very excited to see who these guys were. What were these guys like? And then we had heard that they were going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show in February, on February the 9th. So we were all primed, and we were sitting in front of the television on Sunday night, 8 o'clock, the Ed Sullivan Show. I have to tell you that when we all saw the Beatles, it was like aliens had landed. I mean, now, it's hard to imagine now because you look at them and you go, well, it's like, what's the big deal? But everyone at that time, they were wearing crew cuts, and you didn't wear your hair long or anything like that. And the Beatles, they looked like, they might as well have had hair down to the floor for how people reacted to it. And I remember watching them on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I thought, these guys are just great. And the next day, it was on Monday, I remember going into school, and the only topic of conversation that day were the Beatles. That was it. Teachers, the principal, everybody. That's all they talked about were the Beatles. And so by that summer, the summer of '64, I had decided I got to be in a band. I got to play some music. I want a piece of this action. So I put together a band, and we were called the Plagues. And then I had heard that the Beatles were actually going to be in concert in Detroit in September. And I just said, I've got to go see these guys. I've got to see them in person. In fact, I've got to meet the Beatles. And that was my spin. I've got to meet the Beatles, come hell or high water. So I managed to I tried to get tickets, and we couldn't get tickets to it because it was already sold out. But I conned my parents into driving me down to Detroit. Now, I'm from Lansing, Michigan originally, so Detroit was about a 2-hour drive. Anyway, I talked my parents into driving me to Detroit. And my mom and dad were saying, well, how are you going to get in? And I said, I'll find some way to get in. Now, I also have to preface this with, I was the first kid in my entire city with long hair. People didn't have long hair back then, but I had combed it down and tried to get the Beatle look. In fact, that day at Olympia Stadiums, I was wearing one of those Beatle jackets, the collarless jacket, and I had my hair. So I looked pretty Beatle-esque at the time. Anyway, so my parents were going to go to a place called Brass Rail, which was a restaurant in Detroit. They were going to have dinner while I was at the concert. So they dropped me off, and when I get there, I look out, and the Olympia Stadium, which is in kind of a funky area, was surrounded by, there must have been 15,000 girls outside there. And I'm some distance away yet, but I'm thinking, how am I going to get in there? And suddenly I had this crazy idea. I walked up to this cop, and I said, I'm in this band, and we're supposed to play before the Beatles go on, but I don't have me pass because I got my show clothes on. Well, he looked at me and he said, look, kid, you just stay right here, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So I didn't know. Was he going to arrest me? What was going to happen? Anyway, he showed up in a few minutes with 3 other cops, and they give me a police escort into Olympia Stadium and into the backstage area. Now, once I get back inside, they pass me off to this security guard inside. And he ushers me into this room, which is probably, I'm guessing, like 30 by 50 or something like that. It was a big white room annexed to where the stage was. And the room was completely empty, except there was a table and some lights and the cop and me. And we're standing there, and he's trying to find somebody who, the cop's trying to find somebody who knows if I belong in the show or not. And he sees this one guy, and the guy says, I don't know, I don't know, don't bug me. So I'm safe for the moment. Anyway, as I'm standing there, 4 guys walk past me. It's the Beatles. And they sit down behind the table, and then all these press come in, and they have a press conference right in front of me. At this point, I'm going, I can die. I'm good. Anyway, they do a press conference in front of me. And I remember, one of the things I remember about the press conference is that they looked like dolls because they had like makeup on. It never even occurred to me that they'd wear makeup on stage, but I guess it makes sense. Anyway, so they finished their press conference, and as they're walking out, the 4 of them walk right by me, and John looks at me. John Lennon looks at me. He sees the cop holding my arm, and he goes, "So, son, what are you in for?" And then he walks past, and I'm going, okay, I am so good now. And anyway, so the cop who's holding my arm finally finds the MC of the show. He walks by, and they ask him if I belong in the show, and he says, "No, get this kid out of here." So they literally throw me into the street, like you see in the movies. I go crashing down into the street, and my face is on the pavement. And I look across, and I see these 2 shoes, and it's the cop. I look up, and it's the cop who I first went to, turned out to be a really nice guy. And he looks down at me and he goes, "So I guess I didn't believe you, huh?" And so he pulls me up. He takes me across the street to a little diner and buys me a lemonade. And he says, "Look, kid, if you want to get in there to see these guys, then there's a scalper across the street who's selling tickets." And so that's what I did. I went over and bought the $3.50 tickets for $5. Anyway, so I got inside, and I don't think anybody's ever really portrayed what a Beatle concert was like. Even when you see the footage, it doesn't do it justice. It was the most crazy event I've ever been in my life. In 1964, it was like, this is the height of Beatlemania. I mean, you could have turned off every light in the place, and it would have been fully lit, as bright as day, because of all the flash bulbs going like this. And it was just insane, and you couldn't hear what the Beatles were actually playing, except for the first few notes of the song. And then when you heard that, you knew what it was. But it was the roar of the screaming was so loud. It was like standing next to a jet engine at full roar. Anyway, it was a pretty amazing concert. And nothing I thought was impressive about the Beatles. They're not like modern bands who slowly walk up on stage and plug in and tune for 5 minutes and then talk and stuff. No, they leaped up on stage, they plugged in, and within a few seconds they were into like Twist and Shout or whatever the first song was. And I remember that just audiences went wild. And I remember some girl from the second balcony threw a silver compact, and it clocked George Harrison right on the side of the head, and he went down like a sack of wheat. And I remember, I think it was John Lennon walked over and picked him up, and they did the rest of the concert. Anyway, so finally the concert's over. I'm so happy, I'm like thrilled. And there's a subplot going on here, which I didn't know about at the time, which is my parents, okay? So they went to this place called the Brass Rail. Now, this is quite a ways away from where Olympia Stadium was. It was in downtown Detroit. And What my mom didn't know is that the Brass Rail was actually a strip club. My dad didn't tell her that part of the story. Anyway, so as they're walking downstairs, which is where the showroom was, she's seeing all these pictures of strippers and stuff. She's going, Mo? My dad's name was Morris, Morris Malone. Anyway, Mo? What's going on here? Anyway, he gets her down. They into their seats, and they're sitting there, and the girls come out and start doing the bump and grind. This is a story my mom told me, and so she's getting pissed off, and so she throws her head back and she looks up and she looks at the ceiling. She noticed the ceiling is rippling. The paint on the ceiling is rippling. Well, the place is on fire, and it burns down while they're there. Now, my folks were able to get out of the place. The police and the fire department shows up, and my dad says, "Oh, I got to go and save some of the girls." And Mom grabs it. "You're not going in there." Anyway, so it was pretty funny. Anyway, so they were late picking me up. So I'm standing outside of Olympia Stadium, and this is gone on for quite a while now, and there's still several thousand girls out front waiting for their rides. Well, this one girl sees me, and I'm, like I said, very sort of Beatlesque, and she comes up and says, "Are you in a band?" And I said, "Yeah, I got this little band called the Plagues." And she said, "Well, can I have your autograph?" I said, "Sure." So I signed an autograph. One of her friends sees her getting an autograph, so she comes and gets an autograph. Before I know it, I'm pressed against Olympia Stadium. There's hands coming in, grabbing my clothes and pulling at my hair, and I'm kind of in serious trouble here. Suddenly an arm comes in, and it's got stripes on it, and it's a cop, and he pulls me out of the center. And it's not the cop, the friendly guy, it's the guy from inside, the security guard, and he's pretty pissed off at me. So they arrest me, believe it or not, they arrest me for inciting a riot, drive me down to downtown Detroit, and throw me in this jail cell with this guy who's going, "I'm going to kill her. If I get my hands on that woman, I'm going to kill her." I'm going, okay. So anyway, so the end of the story really is that my folks show up at Olympia Stadium finally. I'm nowhere to be seen, and my dad sees this guy sweeping, and he says, "Have you seen this kid?" And the guy says, "Well, did he have long hair? Was he wearing a wig?" My dad says, "No, that was his hair." And the guy says, "Well, I think they arrested him and took him to downtown Detroit." So finally, my folks are on the way, and as I'm in jail, in the jail cell, one of the cops comes up to me, and this is classic. He comes up and says, "Are you really in a band?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Will you sign this for my daughter?" And I went, "Okay." So I thought that was like pretty wacky. Anyway, so my parents finally show up, and the last thing I remember is my parents driving me home, and I remember my dad saying, "That kid's gotta get a damn haircut." So that's my Beatles story, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on Undertaking Cinema. Bye-bye.